Hello, I am Dr. Alicia Wooten. If you spell my name very quickly, that's what my sign name looks like. But today I'm going to be talking to you about how I became a community scientist and my journey about how I got to where I am today. I'll start with my background and who I am, how I got to where I am today, science communication as an art, how I use science communication through my nonprofit organization called AtomicHands, and where I see us going from here, because I do see a lot of really interesting deaf scientists here with us today. So I want to talk about what we do from here. This is a common experience of deaf and hard of hearing individuals, the dinner table syndrome, where we are the only deaf person at the dinner table. Nobody else uses sign language. Now, I was diagnosed as hard of hearing when I was 3, and I didn't know any sign language or deaf people until I was about 12 years old when I met my first deaf peer. And at that time, I did SimCom. I talked and signed at the same time. And then when I was 16, I got my cochlear implant. And so really my whole life, I used spoken English until I started to pick up some signs and transition to using American Sign Language when I came to RIT. If you knew me while I was a student here, I have to apologize. I was very distractible. I talked a lot. I put a lot of work off. I was a very good procrastinator as a student. But at the same time, RIT was my first ever experience with an ASL interpreter. I had C-print notes and an ASL interpreter in the classroom, and so I was able to look back and forth between the two of them. And so by the time I was second or third year, I had moved on from C-print and moved on to using an ASL interpreter. And so, I was trying to learn ASL signs for science through an interpreter. There's a lot of initialized signs in science, a lot of finger spelling. The sign for mutation, specifically, used to look like this, the sign change with an M, and now we don't use that anymore. This is the sign we use. So the signs that I saw as a student here didn't really match my style and match my learning style. And honestly, I really have no idea what I'm doing still. I'm still trying to get through everything at this point. I'll let you take a look at this slide. We deaf people already know this. It's part of our lived experience. We're really good at multitasking. But one really challenging thing about science, and something that really caused me to struggle, is part of this, actually. I mean, it depends on the program. RIT is unique, but if you were the only deaf person in a classroom or in a program, you did a lot of extra work looking for ASL interpreters. So you have information that's being relayed from a hearing teacher to an ASL interpreter back to the person receiving the information. And once the deaf person receives the information from the interpreter, they also then have to do some interpretation, some self-interpretation, to really figure out what that content means. So there is a lot of this sidelined work that we're doing in order to learn the content. Whereas A hearing person just goes into the classroom and sits in the class, listens to the information, and is able to process it. So there isn't as much missing from the hearing individual's experience because they are able to have direct access to that information. We have to make sure that we are engaging people and creating interest in the sciences. All right, so I have a hypothesis as a scientist. This is what I do. And so after about 10 or 15 years, I think that we're starting to figure this out. So the secret to being a successful scientist is, are you ready? You want to know what it is? All right. It depends. I know that's a pretty bad answer, but at Gallaudet University, students will say that they don't understand why some people might get a virus and other people don't. And some people are wondering, why does my mom have cancer, but my dad has always been healthy? And there's just not one correct answer or one direct answer. And it's not that everybody is going to have the same pathway to success. They vary. And so you just have to figure out what works best for you. And I realized that for myself, I might have procrastinated, I might have talked a little bit more in class than I should have, but it's really important for you to recognize who you are as a person and don't look to other people and compare yourself. Just don't do that. It's not going to work for you. So this quote here says, basically, taking risks is important. Sometimes you're going to fail, but really, when we're working through experiments, sometimes we think if one fails, we're just going to stop. But really what we're doing is moving on and trying something new. So if we don't have any data, it's still worth sharing. So I just wanted to share with you a little bit about my PhD experience. I did not have a lot of successes in that experience. I did go through quite a number of failures. So my senior year here at RIT, I kind of went back and forth on what I wanted to do. I used to want to be a cardiologist, and then I realized that competing with other students in that field was not something that I wanted to do. I had experienced some biology research at RIT, so I thought, why not apply for a PhD? So I applied to one school and I was rejected. So I took a year off. And during that year, I worked at a grocery store as a cashier in Texas. I could not find a job in the science fields. And so after that, I decided to apply to 3 more schools. I had an interview at one of them. And during that interview, the man asked me if I knew what angiogenesis meant. It means the creation of blood vessels, but I did not know. I actually did know what the word meant after I had seen it in print, but it actually ended up being lost in translation. But I ended up being rejected at all 3 schools. I had a really hard time accepting that. And I decided that maybe I needed to do a little bit more research. And so I applied to 3 post-bac programs, and I was accepted and went to the University of Rochester under Dr. Dewhurst. That's where I studied HIV and the brain. There I learned more about science, but I also learned more about myself. And after that one-year program, I applied to 9 different programs. I was interviewed at 6, and I was accepted at 6. And I chose Boston University for my PhD program. So after all of these failures and some successes, I think that one key thing changed for me. My mentor at the University of Rochester was just very honest with me. So this was my mentor, and this was told to me during a discussion about 10 years ago. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but this was an actual discussion we had about my personal statement. They didn't know who I was from my personal statement. It just looked like a carbon copy of everyone else's, and they were not able to see what made me unique. So I was told to redo it. Are there any undergrad students here? Okay, that's good. So if you are interested in furthering your education, here are some tips for you on what your personal statements should look like. So I'm going to show you my before and after. One talked about my love for science, and another talks about my deaf identity. So I'm going to show you before and afters of those statements. Do you think that that describes who I am as a person? I mean, it tells you that I did an internship in zoology, but really that's it. It basically looks like every other personal statement. So when you're doing your personal statement, you really need to show off your personality and show people who you are. You know, if you're an exciting person, like me, I dance in the classroom while I'm teaching sometimes, I need to show that. So this statement here shows who I am as a person and shows what I value about science. So you have to keep the big picture in mind, but you also need to explain the why and how you got there. So yes, I am a deaf person. I'm very proud of who I am as a deaf person. We are used to the way that we frame our deafness, and sometimes it comes across as negative. We talk about our frustrations and what we've had to do to get through that, but I'm done with that. I don't want to talk about that anymore. I just want to change the way that I speak about my disability. This one says, in addition, my drive to do well in science stems from the challenges I faced while growing up deaf, as I received a lot of doubt and negativity. I want to show others inside and outside of the deaf community that I am more than capable of being successful despite my disability. So this is a negative view, and if I were to reframe that, it would say, being deaf is not about what I cannot do, it's about what I can, and this has given me the ability to seek out the positives in every situation. Cancer biology research and a deaf individual have a parallel track. Both encounter criticism and uncertainty, but both always seem to surprise the doubters in the end with new potential. So I changed the way I'm framing this. I'm showing how my deaf identity can benefit others, not talking about how people need to help me, but how I can provide benefit to other people. So that was more about language. But honestly, language is art. Doesn't matter if it's written English or spoken English or ASL. So I've talked about how we can use our personal statement to best describe who we are. But it can also describe our research to different audiences. The way I present my message can change depending on my audience. And there is art in language, and sometimes I think that we forget about that.
That moment that I recognized the value of science communication and how it needs to be tailored really shifted my trajectory and my goals for my career. I wanted to do research. I wanted to get millions in grants. I wanted to be a PI for research. That was initially my goal. But over time, I came to realize that what I really valued was being able to communicate the findings of scientific research, because science is complex, and the scientists and the public are like apples and oranges. The way we talk about science with scientists is different than how we talk about science with our family and friends. And so, as community scientists, I need to be able to convey my findings to both groups. I need to be able to explain things in a way that the public will clearly understand my science findings. So that realization led me to these few questions. Again, what does ASL and STEM really look like, right? How do deaf STEMists sign ASL concepts about science? How do we convey our research using American Sign Language? Do you have a community where you can discuss your findings and your discipline in ASL? 10 years ago, we really didn't. There were just a handful of people, but that is growing now, and there are more people. And then the secondary discourse, or the discourse that we use outside of our home and regular environments, is being reevaluated in the deaf STEM community. We are beginning to have a better understanding and reconsider what that scientific STEMist dialogue looks like in ASL. So this brings me back to this concept. Science concepts do not belong solely to English. For years and years, we've understood science concepts following the English grammatical rules. Words and definitions of vocabulary words have been very important. And that has its time and place. It's critical in your learning. But we also, as deaf scientists, need to understand the concepts as they come to us in English and as they would be conveyed in American Sign Language. We wouldn't ask students to learn science and French at the same time, but we're asking deaf students to learn science concepts and the signs for them in ASL at the same time. So what I've given a lot of thought to over the years, and what led to AtomicHands, is the thought of how do we take back ownership of American Sign Language and STEM? And I've got a three-pronged approach. We've got the vocabulary word in English, and then its meaningful sign in American Sign Language. During my days at RIT, there were several different dictionaries for deaf STEMists, and at the time we would vote for which the best sign would be. And for a number of years, signs have been created, and we see more and more of that sign creation and lexical creation over time. There were chemistry signs that were created in the past. So we've been growing and evolving the language to accommodate the needs of deaf STEMists. Language use and evolution cannot be dictated by the few, no matter their expertise. Instead, languages change because their users choose to change them. So the ASL STEM Forum was one of the very first deaf STEMist dictionaries that was utilized and created at the University of Washington. And this quote I find very meaningful, because language should not belong to the elite few. Language belongs to the community, and it's the community of users of that language that make the changes and evolution in the language. For too long, language has been controlled by a small minority of people. And so I challenge our community to change that and take language back as a community and help the language evolve as a community. So when a sign is involved, if I develop a sign for a specific concept and I use it in my career and my daily work, you don't have to accept it. That's okay. You can create one that suits your needs in your work environment or educational environment. The other two parts of my three-pronged approach are discourse, how we engage and have relatable conversation, how you convey your point, how you share your stories, and then finally, knowledge. You can't share information if you don't have a clear understanding of the topic. So with all three of these points, I feel like the deaf community has the ability for creative language play to develop new signs and alter and improve the way we teach science concepts. So STEM discourse takes practice. It's not something that's innate. It doesn't come overnight. You saw the video samples of 2011 to 2019 and how my language use changed. Sign language is my second language. I learned it later in life. So for me, it means that I typically begin with an English structure and then I have to translate that into ASL. So that takes muscle memory and that takes repetition. In my PhD studies, I had to do a lot of mouse dissection because I was interested in the lung biology, and the mouse had to be dissected in a clean way so that I could study the parts. And initially it was very difficult. It probably took 15 to 20 minutes to do a dissection. But after practicing every day, doing these mouse dissections in the same way, probably after a month or two, 15 minutes was reduced to about 2 or 3 minutes. The same dissection that originally took me 15 or 20 minutes, I could now do in 2 or 3. And ASL STEM discourse takes the same kind of practice. It doesn't come easily. You have to work at it and practice it. You have to use your hands and see what feels right and what looks right. You have to play with the language, because the sign will evolve from your knowledge and your expression of the language. So for me, science communication is really important. It takes practice. You have to share the information. Who your audience is makes a difference, because you have to make sure that you convey your information in a way that your audience can benefit from it, both the scientific audience and the community. So, if you focus on the big picture, I suggest you share a maximum of 3 points. Don't go on and on with too much information. Keep it simple, just 3 points. And if you're making a video, a deaf STEM video, keep it under 5 minutes, because people don't want to watch really long, drawn-out videos. And your piece should be about the ideas, not just bombarding people with facts. Make it a story, make it relatable, include the facts in your story, make it more conversational, engage people in the video. My second tip is put your science in context. That means you have to know your audience. The general public has an 8th grade understanding of scientific concepts, so you may not start out of the gate with scientific terminology and jargon. You have to make your public understand your message. I call it the family and friends gauge. If I sign this information to my family or friends and I get that face like, "What are you talking about, Alicia?" I know I have to change my messaging. Show photos, tell stories, use analogies that are relatable. This is from BioRender, the picture you see on the slide. And if you're not familiar with BioRender, please check it out. It's amazing. It's a really nice summary of my PhD research in one slide. And that slide, that image, helps me convey the concepts. It shows exactly what's happening at the cellular level. And so when I sign it, I can utilize the imagery of that picture to relate my signs to it and make it more visual. I can talk about what happens to the cell externally and internally and how the transmission happens within the cells. And I avoid jargon in doing so because most people won't understand it. Probably one of the most important things you can do today is to avoid bias. It's important that you recognize your privilege. Many of us have the benefit of becoming deaf scientists. We've got the benefit of understanding the content and the opportunities to pursue it, and not everyone has that. So remember to be open and curious. Don't dismiss others' beliefs. Take into consideration what they're presenting. Ask questions about where they've gotten their information from. Give them alternative articles to read or think about. Don't simply tell someone they're wrong and dismiss them. That happened quite a bit with COVID, especially with the transmissibility of it, right? And social media really made that much worse because a lot of the information was incorrect. So stay up to date with information. And that means you have to keep reading and stay engaged in your discipline. So what does community science mean to me? If you know what community science really means, you know that this is not the proper definition, because community science really means an individual willing to go out into the field to collect data and conduct research. But my definition of community science is a little bit different. I'm here to serve the community. My goal is to educate the community. My goal is to change K-12 and post-secondary educational experiences within the science disciplines and STEM fields so that they're more accessible. I want to engage deaf students. I want them to be excited about learning STEM concepts. That's my goal. When I was in college, the only people who understood my concepts were in my class with me. No one outside of my class experience understood anything. But I believe that the community and the general public does have a desire to understand science. So with that goal of community science in mind, I'm the co-founder of AtomicHands. Another peer of mine, by the name of Barbara Speaker, is the other co-founder. We've spent a number of years together traveling and learning together, recognizing that there aren't many deaf scientists out there, recognizing that there's not a lot of exposure to scientific content in ASL, and recognizing that only people in our PhD programs understood the concepts. And it was frustrating because as we pursued our PhD degrees, we realized that we were learning amazing things, but it wasn't accessible to the community. And how can you make something like that accessible to the community? So our goal for AtomicHands, you see on the slide, are these 3 goals. I like odd numbers. We want to foster wonder and curiosity. And you'll see that a lot with our videos. We talk about science concepts in ASL, and we have a number of different topics. We also want to empower the community. We want to encourage the community to think about how would you express those science terms in a way that makes sense? How can you express it in a way that might be different or better? And play with your hands and play with the language and use visual concepts so that it's visually accessible and understandable. Whatever it may look like, play with it until it feels right. And then finally, we want to encourage the collaboration and networking, which is one of the purposes.
We have quite a few reasons why we create these videos in ASL. I've only provided 2 of them here, but we have limited resources. There used to be Facebook pages, Instagram pages where you could read in English all of these scientific concepts, but it wasn't accessible in ASL. So another goal of ours was to reduce disinformation. Sometimes information gets published and then a journalist who does not have the scientific expertise to understand all of the information would then publish an article for the public that was very misunderstood. Now the other two, empowering and encouraging, I want to ask you, do you think that we as deaf scientists have a responsibility to share what we know with the public? I think we do. AtomicHands and our missions was not created just for Barbara and I. It was to encourage other people to join us in our discourse. So I'm asking you now to consider your responsibility to our community and consider what you can contribute. These are ways you can contribute. So as we move forward, there will be more and more opportunities for our community, and we need to take back ownership of our language. And instead of using English and initialized signs to convey scientific concepts, consider ASL and consider how you might conceptually accurately convey the same topics to younger children who use ASL. And honestly, anyone can appreciate science. Sometimes I have students come into my classes and they tell me that they really do not enjoy science. And I have to question the reasoning that they give me. And sometimes it's maybe that it just wasn't accessible. We need to evaluate the signs that we use for STEM vocabulary and see if they are actually matching the concepts that they need to convey. This is my last slide, and I want to just show you what you can do to continue to support the community. You can make your own videos of STEM topics in ASL. Some of the information that we receive, we pass on. Honestly, if you want to do this, you really just need a camera and a tripod. If you don't know exactly how you're going to convey the information, you can practice with family, friends, and peers. Just practice before you create. Create meaningful signs. I know that I've said we need to get away from only using initialized signs and English vocabulary, but that's not entirely true. If you are looking at a specific sign, for example, the sign for mutation or transcription, just consider whether it works in that concept or not. Perhaps changing the way you sign mutation would make more sense, specifically when using the sign for genes and showing the mutation on a specific gene. Or if you're talking about transcription or translation or protein generation, you can say transcription happens and then translation happens, but it might be better to show it visually like this. So you can see the way that the amino acids are folding to create the protein. And so it's much more visually explicit. And the last thing is, please get involved with AtomicHands. Barbara and I are the only ones who are working it right now, but we are constantly looking for people who are interested in working with us. So please get involved. And with that, I think I will wrap up and take any questions you may have.
So I have 2 comments or questions, both about AtomicHands. Where can we find the website? Are you on Facebook?
So Atomic Hands is accessible in many places. We've just redone our website, so it's www.atomichaNds.com. We are also on Facebook and Instagram. We do post all of our videos there. They're also posted on YouTube, and all of the videos are captioned.
Thank you. And our second question. I hope that you don't think that I'm poking a hole in your presentation, but this is about American Sign Language. I agree that everyone, including people with hearing loss, should strive for a common access for information with ASL or a spoken language. But in the end, you still have to write papers in English. You still have to know it for publishing. And you need to be able to write grant proposals, and that's not going to be in American Sign Language. So there are many review committee members that aren't going to know ASL. They're only going to understand the written English. And so I'm posing to you, what do you say about that?
Well, I would say you're not wrong. However, writing papers, grants, and the communication we use through that is important. It's something that you can learn over time. But how do you get to that point? How do you get there? How do you write these publications if you don't understand the concepts? If we want more scientists, we need to recruit more deaf and hard of hearing individuals who are interested, and that interest begins in primary school.
I agree. In your first slide, you talked about the concept about how things work. And then you have to include the words. So yes, you can have a visual slide, but you also need to have the English form. So you can have a visual concept and a theory and a hypothesis, but you need to be able to apply it in English for proposals and for publishing.
Yes, but again, we don't ask people to learn English and French simultaneously. Typically, you need one language to support learning of another. Yes, English as a concept is important, but it does have its time and place. And I did show in some of my graphics, they were labeled. The English vocabulary was there. And you can go through all of the graphics and explain what people are seeing visually. You can explain that there's a cell with a receptor, and you can start with English as a foundation, or you can start with the vocabulary on the screen, describe how it works in ASL, and go back to the English. You can also simultaneously communicate what people are seeing. And I think that there is the right time and place to use ASL and also the time and place to use English. And sometimes we think that we just need to throw all of the information out there at once and the student needs to understand it all, but that's not possible. We need to change that.
I have a third comment. As a deaf scientist, how many are there compared to our hearing scientist peers? So a lot of people are listening to science. How do we have to work with our hearing peers to continue our development in learning science?
There are many more than there were 10 years ago. This conference and the number of people in this room wouldn't be the way it is if it weren't growing. So we are seeing more and more deaf scientists. We're seeing more and more collaborations between deaf and hearing scientists. So it's happening.
It means the scientific community needs the underrepresented populations to be involved in science.
Well, we need everyone.
We have our unique perspective to provide our community. We have our own ideas, and people should be able to learn that and know about that.
If you want to be a scientist, it really doesn't matter who you are. It's the drive that makes it.
That's right. Thank you for your time. Hello, I'm Denise Cavan, and I work here at NTID in our regional center, and I support your work in STEM. And I wanted to ask about the different STEM signs and resources. I love what you said during your presentation about working as experts together to develop signs. It doesn't work as someone dictating a specific vocabulary word. We have to work together as a community. And I think that's an important thing as we're developing signs to understand science. And you're right. The more resources we have available to us, I think that an interesting approach could be to have a list of possible resources that might work for you. What do you recommend? Where should we start? Where's a starting point? Where do we begin?
Oh, I love that question. And I don't really have a specific answer, but I do have some ideas. About 5 or 8 years ago, maybe, at Boston University, there was a group of people who were getting together to create some scientific signs. And I was asked to be involved, but I wanted to be involved, but they did not want me involved because I was a second language learner of ASL. And so there are more and more groups of people who are getting together to do this kind of work. And I know that we don't want too many people involved in these groups, but I do think it is important for them, the individual groups, to collaborate. There are several websites out there right now. Some I don't like. I would like there to be some kind of hub, or I don't know if there are any IT people in the room who could help me out, or some people who know coding, or somebody who could put all of these websites together in one hub where there was a search bar, and we could combine all of these community-created signs in one place. I'm not exactly sure what that would look like, but sometimes you might spend 15 or 30 minutes looking for one sign. For example, the sign for ant, the bug ant. You might search for several minutes trying to find the exact sign that you wanted for ant. But, I don't have a specific answer, but I do think that there could be one in terms of a hub.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Hello, my name is Brittany, and I have a comment about how engaged I was in your presentation. I understand about speaking and written English being important, and in college level, that is an expertise we need to be able to have. But as you're talking about the concepts and understanding the concepts first, that's very difficult. And in my second year of college, I asked some peers that we were hearing, I asked about explaining the concepts. So they didn't have a clear understanding either, and then I had to ask the professor. And then I needed to ask someone who could sign it to me and knows the content. And that tutor was one that really gave me an understanding. And this was a missionary in church, and it was interesting to get the information clearly interpreted to me. In classroom setting, it was very difficult, and I was embarrassed. Here I was, singled out in the classroom, and I didn't want to feel like somebody wouldn't think that I wasn't intelligent to be able to understand the concepts. But as soon as it was explained to me in my language of American Sign Language, I understood the concepts completely. And I realized it's not just me, and that we do need to encourage children to get that information in their language so that they can understand STEM subjects better.
I 100% agree with that. Are there any other questions or comments?
So my name is Rich Boyce, and I'm a teacher at the University of Pittsburgh in the Department of Biomedical Informatics. And of course, I know Alicia, we've met before because we have a summer program that over the past few years has brought high schoolers and undergraduates to join with a large cohort of students that are studying science across a range of topics. And we've been privileged to work with Alicia and some other people to help make the program more accommodating for deaf and hard of hearing students. So as you're talking today, Alicia, the question I have for you is, as a hearing person who's learning sign, but I'll never probably reach the level of proficiency that you have, but I want to be able to communicate to the students the scientific topics as I'm teaching and as I'm mentoring. And moreover, the students are going into other laboratories, and most of those mentors aren't going to have the motivation to learn any sign. So there's going to be a need for interpreters in all of those contexts. So I wanted to see what you thought about how you would translate what you were talking about today, which seemed to be more about a deaf scientist communicating science to the public. How would you translate that to the interpreting field so that interpreters would have resources and a better understanding of how to pass on what's being conveyed in the laboratory and the classroom to deaf as they come into these more mainstream environments? Thank you.
Well, there are a lot of different ways that interpreters can utilize these signs. I do believe that RIT has a master's in healthcare interpreting. So really, interpreters need to have that background knowledge. So the interpreters will get vocabulary through that knowledge, and then they're able to convey the information conceptually. But if the interpreters don't have the background knowledge of the topic, then it's nearly impossible to convey it in ASL. Getting the appropriate training and practice is very difficult. If a student is in an interpreting program, your minor should be in something that you're interested in, maybe coding or biology. And then you go into the interpreting field already having an understanding of that topic. In our PhD programs, we often have to educate our interpreters if the deaf person is willing. In an undergrad situation, it might be a little bit different. For example, an interpreter, a working interpreter, should not accept a job if they don't have the knowledge. But there's also ways that interpreters can do preparation work in order to gain the knowledge, in order to interpret successfully in those situations.
So the National Library of Medicine, which funds our training program at the University of Pittsburgh, it looks like they're going to fund a program where we're partnering with Gallaudet to offer summer internship slots, and we're looking for 3 to 5 deaf students to come through and collaborate with us. And one of those slots is actually going to be at Gallaudet for interpreting. So that was one of the novel things we put in there, is we want one interpreting student at Gallaudet to be a part of that experience and start to develop an interpreting book, for example, how to mentor science. So we'll be excited to meet with you and learn more as we build that program out. Thank you.
That's exciting.
It's nice to meet you. I'm an graduate student. And I'm from a small town. I was wondering about graduate school or PhD in my future, and I wondered if you have any advice for me as I'm exploring that.
But some general information, general advice to undergraduate students who may be looking into furthering their education is develop relationships with your teachers. That is one thing that I did not do while I was here at RIT. I would go to class and then leave. And so my letters of recommendation were not that great. When I asked my professors to write letters for me, they didn't really know me well. If you can develop that relationship with your teachers, that helps with your letters of recommendation. If your letters aren't great, good luck. So get to know your professors. Hang out with them, just chat with them, have some conversations. They're people too. And also your personal statements. Make sure they show your true personality. You also really do need to look into who you are as a person and figure out if you really want to do research or if you're just saying that because that's what other people are doing. Maybe your motivation is really in something else. So you really do need to evaluate who you are and be okay with changes that need to happen. I spent my time here thinking that I wanted to be a cardiologist and that I was going to medical school. But it really took me until my senior year to say that I really don't want to do that. And if I did, I would be miserable. And so be honest with yourself. You should not feel like you're stuck in something. So be comfortable making changes. Once you figure out what you want, then I can give you more specific advice.